Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the Jams Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we have quite the episode planned for you. We're going to be talking about two brand new releases. We're going to be talking about the new album from Scottish. They are Scottish, right?
They are Scottish.
Scottish electro pop group Chvrches, their album Screen Violence. And we're also going to be talking about podcast veteran band Real Ones Remember. Between the Buried and Me, we're talking about Colors 2. Colors was, in fact, so good, there is a Colors 2. So if you haven't seen our segment on that, on the one of the first episodes of this podcast, I think it was like the third.
It was the third.
Most of our opinions are different somehow at this point.
Yes, somehow we have changed and evolved since then, but maybe go watch that a little bit, give you some context for Between the Buried and Me and for Colors. But we have covered the previous one, and now we're going to cover that one. And on this week's Record Club, it is going to be August, who isn't here yet, but he totally will be, August's recommended album, which is System of a Down's Toxicity. And that's not all. We're going to be continuing our 1991 retrospective this week with Talk's seminal masterpiece. We're talking about fucking Laughing Stock. So be on the lookout for that. This week we put out 2 additional videos after our normal one. We put up the 1991 retrospective episode on Pearl Jam's 10. That was a really fun episode. Go watch that if you haven't. And we also put up an episode on 9 Inch Nails' concept album Year Zero. So go check that out if you haven't.
I don't think we have anything to shout out. So let's go straight into what we've been listening to this week's segment. Jake, what have you been listening to?
Quite a bit, actually. I listened to a couple of new albums. I listened to the new album from one Mr. Sturgill Simpson. His new little record called The Ballad of Dude and Juanita. Dude, amazingly spelled with 2 O's, which absolutely lovely. If you take a look at the project and you see the little runtime, which is like just shy of a half an hour, you're just kind of like, what the hell is this all about, Sturgill? It's definitely not like a highly ambitious project, but it is like, I should start off the bat by saying that I enjoyed it a fair bit. It's a really, really good slice of Sturgill's brand of outlaw country. Little best, leaning into the psychedelic stuff of his previous sound. But this is a cute little concept album that's a narrative little story about the dude and Juanita. It's really like, it's got a really cool kind of campfire story vibe about it that I really appreciated. If you're a fan of Sturgill's, absolutely go check this out. It's it's about as long as an episode of television.
We're talking about the dude here.
I also listened to a project which, curiously, I still haven't listened to the first album from this band, even though I should, but the new album by Big Red Machine, the duo of Aaron Dresner from The National and fucking Bon Iver. Yeah,
Justin Vernon, yeah.
They have like a collaborative little weird neo-folk indie tronica thing project, and I haven't heard the first one, even though I really want to. And I will say this is mildly underwhelming, even though I didn't really have expectations for it. I just like each musician on an individual basis, so I was just like, okay, like it's good, it's a decent project. It's just bogged down by the fact that it is way too fucking long, and B, there's just too many features. It like, to the point where it's just like, even if you made this a little bit more quality, like consistency wise, I don't know how cohesive this would feel, just because they're just throwing everything under the sun that they can get. It's just like I think Taylor Swift is on there twice, and coincidentally, both of them are the least good songs on the album. It's very odd to hear. Yeah, I know, right? It's very strange to hear Taylor going from on her own album on something like Evermore, it's like, oh, she's doing a song with the National, or the National are singing lyrics that are totally written by Taylor Swift, and that's weird. And now it's weird to see the inverse of Taylor singing lyrics that clearly aren't her own on this song. It's just kind of like, what is, I have cognitive dissonance in my brain that feels wrong. Speaking of new albums, I do want to shout out a band called, and if you take anything I say seriously or listen to any part of what I have to say in this section, let it be this. There is a band that is a newer band called Mask of the Phantasm. Yes, like the Batman movie. And I'm pretty sure I came across them because I saw 2 separate posts on the Mars Volta subreddit about this band. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I found their album and downloaded it, only to discover that like this band feels like they don't exist. They don't have a rate your music page. I can't find any like evidence of any other music that anyone a part of this band has ever made. It's like just this album, period, which if you listen to it makes it all the more baffling. The album they put out is their debut called New Axial Age. And I believe I described it in the most appealing way possible to Morgan and Tyler the other night when I was listening to it. And I was just like, okay, so imagine if Amy Lee fronted the Mars Volta in like octahedron mode. That's this album. And it fucking rules. There is simply no reason for this to not be at least discussed in like prog circles or whatever. It's really, really strange prog post-hardcore alt-rock fucking stuff. Like it's like some weird mono genre that the only thing I can compare it to is like the more restrained shit of the Mars Volta, which it makes it appropriate to where I found it.
Literally, their guitarist is named Omar.
Wow, damn, holy shit.
What if this is like a fucking the Network to Green Day thing?
I was thinking it's like The Armed. Like maybe
Right.
this is like
Yeah,
that.
it was reminding
Well,
me
like,
of that when you were describing it.
You know the joke from the Snare Green Day deep dive where he shows the Network. It's like these.
Oh, yeah,
are the
it's just like,
members. It's
here are the
Green Day
members of Green
mustaches.
Day, and their mustaches have only gotten bushier. But yeah, point blank being, if you like the Mars Volta, if you like prog, if you like, I don't know, interesting alternative rock music in a wider sense, please listen to this, because there is no reason for it to not have a bigger following. I think somebody might have started a subreddit for that band just based on like the one album. It's like, if anything else, it sounds fucking phenomenal. Like there's like 4 separate occasions where the song is just like, you know, it's really going. It actually, the band kind of reminds me a lot of the band Rollo Tomasi, which I've spoken about on here before. Very similar vibe. But there are like 4 separate points on New Axial Age where the song just like keeps building and going, and it's fucking hard as hell. And then all of a sudden it's just like 45-minute long saxophone solo. Fucking
yeah. The minute you told me they had a saxophone player in the band, I was just like, this more prog needs to have saxophones in it. I've been feeling this way for a long time. There's just not enough like weird. I mean, we're going to talk about an album today that has a lot of weird instrumentation in it for music that is ostensibly progressive. But come on, like, this is the way to save prog music, is to really like actually start getting creative with it and reviving it in interesting ways.
And that is why people need to listen to this album, just because I feel like they are totally doing that right now. And they also have like I already mentioned that it's like the lead singer, obviously not as like melodramatic as somebody like Amy Lee, and I mean that in a positive way. But like, she's got a really powerful, commanding voice, really good songwriting too. A little like, it's a bit more like immediately prescient. It's, you know, obviously doesn't have near the level of esotericism that Cedric and Omar bring to the table. It's a little bit more like, but it's also has like kind of identifiable notions about, you know, I won't say it's an online album, but it's definitely an album that's sort of like embracing the ubiquitousness of the internet and, you know, in a like Satoshi Kon paranoia agent or serial experiments lane kind of way, where it's just like it's just kind of creating a cool avenue to explore this social phenomenon. I'll shout out not another new album for my penultimate pick here, but something that I've been listening to and did mention. I don't think I mentioned it when I first listened to it back in like December or so, just because we were kind of swamped then. But I did listen to it and mentioned it on a segment like this, I think earlier this year. But I've been listening more to the most recent Yves Tumor album, Heaven to a Tortured Mind, to the point where I think this is one of my favorite albums ever now.
Yes.
Which is so odd because like this is just one of those albums where it's like inherently just sort of shows you that even though we as like a podcast try to promote the idea of, you know, putting thought into your opinions before you expressing them and letting something sit with you, this is a prime reason as to why even that mindset's not going to apply to everything in like the limited format. Because when I first heard it, it's an album that sounds so like on the surface very structure, like on a song by song basis, it's structurally unconventional, but also just it's so weird and disparate. That said, what a phenomenal grower. I love basically every song, and you just kind of got to let it sit with you as to what it's even about or what it's doing, because even thematically and on like a writing perspective, it's kind of obtuse and weird. It doesn't let you in immediately, but like the way I read the album now is sort of this thing where it's after the fallout of a really, really like difficult toxic relationship that was like, you know, it started off as like really, you know, healthy and like loving and all this stuff, and eventually like fell out. And like basically the main character of this album is recounting the relationship through the lens of the fact that their mind was entirely fucking destroyed by the fallout of this relationship, which is why you hear stories about the relationship in a non-linear order, why everything on this album sounds like it was put in a fucking microwave and then just been like, here's the mix. And it's like fried, and the synths are really textured and heavy. And it's like listening, I think on the second song, it's like listening to someone talk about a terrible relationship they were in to the point where they can only see their ex-lover as like a mythical beast out of the Book of Revelations. And I mean, just from the trajectory of like, I already loved Safe in the Hands of Love, but Heaven to a Tortured Mind in combination with that, it's just like this next album from them is going to be fucking amazing. I can just feel it. Like the only reason I wouldn't give Heaven to a Tortured Mind like a perfect score other than my tiny itty bitty complaint is the fact that it's like, I know that it's like a Good Kid Mad City, where it's just like, this is like basically the peak, but I know that this person can do even better. But I'm gonna wait patiently for it just because it'll be cool. And let's see, last I'll sort of combine, I think one of these. Well, I mean, Tyler mentioned the new Halsey last week, which I did get time to listen to. It's great, honestly. There was definitely like, Halsey was really trying on the album before this to sort of break that kind of pop EDM mold that sort of like brought her up in the first place. Like Manic is an album I think that has a lot of interesting ideas, but like not all of them completely work. And it leads to the album being really, really disjointed, but like still an interesting direction, because it's like you can tell it's a bit of a sea change for them. And then you have this album, which, I mean, main appeal is that mostly it just fucking knocks. I mean, Halsey as a vocal presence always been pretty good, but she's a bit more like, I don't want to say even like raw or like unfiltered. It's just like their voice is so fucking commanding on this album, and Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross really know how to make that work with the instrumentals. Like there are a couple, like Tyler said that it was very comparable to their work with like their soundtrack work, like The Social Network and stuff. And vast majority, there's also like, you know, plaintive piano stuff that finds itself on the Ghost albums and whatnot, but like there's also moments where it's like an industrial rock instrumental and it goes hard. And also there's just like, there's several songs on there that are it's just Halsey being like, yo, you ever just really like having sex with girls? And it's just like, okay, all right, can we, this is a lot.
There's even like one song on that record, I can't remember exactly what it was, where it's like Trent Reznor and Atticus and Halsey have decided to give like a shoegaze dream pop instrumental to this song. And it works so well. Why did you do this?
I've been listening to that. I've listened to that multiple times this week, even since I spoke about it last week. And I think it's an album that has some limitations, but it also has such a rich text of a record. Like if you really dig into the sorts of things that Halsey is examining on this record, they're talking about motherhood, and Halsey, I believe, has had multiple miscarriages. And so there's themes of bodily failure and disgust, but also like autonomy and control, and these very kind of conflicting emotions all over the record that are very, very powerfully expressed. And it's a record that I think is a little bit more complicated than it might be expected. And also, you know, I think it really can't be impressed enough how daring it is of a record for an artist like Halsey as well, because it's not afraid to be completely unfriendly. Even some of the quieter moments in this record I find most stunning, even more so than the moments when it really lets rip. That said, though, my favorite song on the record is "I'm Not a Woman, I'm a God," which is
so good,
an absolute disco bop banger. And it's just got these really serrated synths in it that are pure Trent Reznor.
Yep.
And it's just, it's dope shit. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to that record this week.
Special shout out to the song Honey, which call back to an earlier episode of this podcast where I say that is, quote, for the sapphics. It's a really fun record. And I feel like Halsey, as an artist, like pivoting this hard in this way means that they are officially somebody who's not only on my radar, but should be on everyone's radar, because it's like, if this ends up being a step and not a detour, then they could very likely make some fucking incredible, like genuinely incredible music this decade. So I'm holding fast for it, because I know that, like, again, great project in its own right, but it's really great for what it promises more than anything else. And the last thing I will mention on here is the last night I gave a listen to my first album by Mazzy Star. I listened to So Tonight That I May See. Mazzy Star being a little bit of an older, like sort of brought up in that same wave of like 90s and early 2000s shoegazy stuff, but like Mazzy Star is a really interesting combination of shoegaze and like alt Americana. It's a strange combination that, you know, not that it wouldn't, like, you imagine that and it's just like, I just can't see these two things working together, but it's a strange thing, but it really, really, really works. At points, it just sounds like if Emmylou Harris fronted a shoegaze band. There's lots of like folk and like rootsier like guitar sounds and balladry on this, but it has that really deep, textural, almost like vast shoegaziness, and it's got some songs that are just a tiny itty bitty bit baggy. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if they grew on me just because they sound immaculate. Any must listen for anybody who is even vaguely interested in shoegaze or of folk rock for that matter. Just some really fucking great stuff.
Okay. Well, Morgan, what hast thou been listening to of late?
Oh, you know, just this little band called Deafheaven. You might have heard of them.
I too have clinical depression.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into
it. The only ones I hadn't heard thus far were New Bermuda and Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. And I loved New Bermuda, and Ordinary Corrupt Human Love is like canonical at this point.
I'm so glad that you love that album, because I was just like, I know he really likes Infinite Granite, but like I can feel it in my fucking bones that Ordinary Corrupt Human Love will be his favorite. I fucking knew it.
I knew that. You get that as soon as you could hear like the vague classic rock influence filtering into their sound on that record, then you can just tell that it's gonna be like honey to a bee.
Interpolating fucking the solo to G World's the middle. You know, that's a cheap shot. Fuck you guys.
How dare you fucking come into my fucking home.
I'm in an invidious position here where I've listened to a lot that I have like stuff to say about, and I've got to like be selective. But I'll start off with an album that I listened to just a few hours before we got on, that I think is like a podcast favorite. I'm 99%, 100% sure that I don't think people would have expected me to really gravitate to. And that is the album One of Us is the Killer by the Dillinger Escape Plan.
Yeah!
Which I really, really, really enjoyed quite significantly.
I cannot wait to talk about that album on the show.
Alexa, play Ascending Forth by Black Midi.
I have listened to that album. That might be the album I've listened to the most this year, maybe. It's like such a brisk listen too. It's just it's like what, 36, 37 minutes long.
40 on the
40 dot.
Something like that. It's oh god, I love that album so much.
But I was literally like doing my shopping with my headphones on, and it was like walking past with people, and in my head it was like, fuck you, shouting insults in my head. And it was like the meme of the people at the party, and it's like no one knows I'm listening to the Dillinger Escape Plan.
Barry! Oh my god, Prancer is like the best album opener of all time.
Oh, for real. But I think like it has such incredible contrast in like tones that it just makes the heavy moments it all the harder.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so listen to an IDM record this week.
Tyler just being like coming a cartoon character.
I just want to make sure I get the people behind it correct. There we go.
Why are they standing behind it?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
Basically, there was a time in which I got this recommendation from a Deep Cuts video, and he was talking about a time in which in which basically Aphex Twin was just living in Cornwall, not doing much, and started up a relationship with one of the members of Musique.
Mike Paradinas?
Yes. Yeah. And they just started a relationship together, exchanging samples and stuff. And together they made the album Expert Knob Twiddlers.
Yeah, I know the record.
Yes. Which was a barrel of fun. It's much more fun than I expected it to be, actually. But it's
twirled your knobs, maybe even.
is a really cheeky. The use of samples is like witty, and it constructs like these IDM bops, right? That you just sort of want to dance around your room to. I loved it.
Yeah, it's a really, really fun record. Above and all, I would even say like more so than even the bounciest music that Rich released as Aphex Twin, and I think you get a really quick sense of that just from the cover art, which is like the two of their faces superimposed onto like a video, like not a video game, like a board game box with like the design, and it's like Connect 4, except instead of the Connect 4 thing, it's like a board of switches. And they're staring at it like kids, and it's really fucking goofy. And
you can tell it's an album that came out of like friends working together instead of like a professional collaboration, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It has that energy.
And like
Love
that
that.
title as well is like a really tongue-in-cheek poking at it as well. Like because knob twiddlers in the 90s was a phrase that was used to kind of like belittle this form of electronic music and say, oh, all you're doing is just twiddling knobs. Like that was a specific phrase. And so they called the album Expert Knob Twiddlers as a way of just kind of like saying fuck you.
But no, what else have I listened to this week? So I listened to a Japanese math rock band called Tricot and their album which it's just
Boris energy.
But it's three ladies and it's incredibly fun. It felt like this is what I've been looking for in a math rock record all of my life, where it has that sort of math rock experimentation and interest in changing things up and putting in chords at weird moments with like a deep love of like very emotional, harmonious playing. And it felt like they wanted to honor math rock while giving you something that was very accessible and fun. And I respected that a lot.
Sick. That's very funny that you listened to Tricot for reasons that I will get into when it's my turn.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Bands of Japanese women going stupid hard is my favorite subgenre of music. See also fucking Otoboke Beaver, the 5, 6, 7, 8s, any band that has done an anime intro.
The final record I want to talk about, I'm glad that August is here so I can talk about it. Another Green World by Brian Eno. Now, I'd already listened to Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy, sort of the last sort of full-length album he made before this, I think. And this is such a different beast so soon afterwards. You guys, the audience probably knows this album very well already. I don't need to teach your grandmother to suck eggs. But no, I love Another Green World. It's probably one of my favorite albums of this all year. Just it's hard to put into words because it's just such an immaculately sonically sound experience. It's gorgeous.
It's
Probably like
it's probably like the definitive, like in the same sense that Maggot Brain is the definitive funk record. You could make the argument that Another Green World is the definitive kind of art rock album, alongside like, I guess, Low, which obviously Eno was heavily involved in as well, and like maybe even Eno's first album to a certain extent as well. But like Another Green World was the moment where I guess that real textural focus that would lean really heavily into the directly ambient music he would make came to the fold. Is released the same month as his Discreet Music, which was his first major ambient release. And it's still an astounding record. I mean, I don't have much to add, but like
fucking good.
I've had people pitch Another Green World to me as like the meeting point between alternative rock and ambient, and I didn't know what that would sound like in my head when that was said to me, and then I listened to Another Green World and it's like, oh, it's like that, of course.
it is
What it
simply
sounds like.
it is simply Brian Eno making synthesizers go burr while Robert Fripp absolutely loses his mind on top of it.
What's really interesting about that album is that every style Fripp and the various other players on the record play the guitar or drums in is listed as, like, the first track, Sky Saw, is listed as being snake guitar. And it's really interesting when you dig into the liner notes and credits of that album and you see like just how he's utilizing these different styles of just playing and giving them strange little goofy names, and how those ideas are incorporated and reinterpreted over the record.
It's also cool as well, like you can see if you listen to the collaborative records that Brian Eno and Robert Fripp made together, No Pussyfooting and Evening Star, they're like these really exploratory ambient records that are like very much a meeting of these two minds. And yet you feel like the ideas that are explored over the long form LP length of those albums are refined into these like bite-sized chunks of perfection on Another Green World, which it's just such a satisfying synthesis of stuff that they had done before, but just really refined down to the most elemental, all it needs to be. And it's just a record that only gets better.
Phil Collins is on that album too, and all he does is play rim shots.
Yeah, that's true.
That's oh god, I
good.
love that. I will shout out here to everybody in case you haven't heard it, but my favorite Brian Eno project thus far is his collaboration with Harold Budd called The Pearl. Harold Budd helped do the soundtrack. It's A Mysterious Skin, one of the bestest films ever made, one of the best soundtracks ever made. And The Pearl is like, man, throw that on, and it's just like, you just see the Matrix and astral project, and you're like, yes, my whole life has been leading up to this moment on this song, on this album. So
yeah, I will listen to that. I love the score for Mysterious Skin, so I'll definitely listen to that.
You will totally hear, but it's
that's
just like, wow,
yeah,
that's definitely the same dude.
Can't wait. So that's my 5.
Okay. Well, I'll go next actually, because I always have to go last. So it's nice that I have to go last, and then August can kind of round us out.
The way you were fidgeting when you said that is like, you look like somebody who needs like one more hit of like meth, just to be like, just give me like one more. Like I always go last. I always go last. It's nice to not go last.
Thanks. It's the autism. So what I've been listening to this week is
boom. What a fucking
this podcast
freak.
Subtitle should just be autistic excellence.
Just a nice sprinkle of that on top there.
So
good measure.
So I'm going to lead this off by talking about 2 Japanese bands, one of which is a Japanese math rock band, to tie into what Saoirse was talking about with the Japanese math rock band Tricot. I listened to a record from the Japanese math rock band Toe, TOE, and their debut album, which is the book about my idle plot on a vague anxiety, which I feel like is maybe slightly mistranslated, but that's how it appears. And anyway, Toe are a Japanese math rock band, as I said, and this record was really interesting. It's kind of like the first American football record, but with the most insane jazz math rock drumming you've ever heard in your life over top of it. It
sounds legit.
It is 100% instrumental. It's really my only thing that's holding me back from it, and this is definitely something that could potentially go away when I spend more time with it, is that it's a little bit one note. It kind of is the same sort of thing for 40 minutes without a lot of variation, but when that thing is these watery, beautifully textured guitars and this absolutely fucking just drummer who's absolutely playing at like 200 BPM over top of it, it's like, it's hard to really get sick of that, but I do wish there was a little bit more variation on it. But even regardless, it's still a record that's worth hearing just for that combination. I actually had our podcast viewer Brett, who might well be watching now, recommend that band Tricot, which is the band that Saoirse talked about. Trico, of course, it's not Tricot. Trico.
That's the pronunciation.
And also Polyphia as well, which is another math rock band that I want to listen to as well. So a little niche that I'm carving into. The band I want to shout out, the second band I want to shout out, is a band called Buffalo Daughter, Japanese neo-psychedelic krautrock influenced dance punk band. Very obscure band. Very few people have rated any of their albums on Rate Your Music. Although I actually have to confess that this wasn't my first exposure to this band, because when I was a kid, I vaguely remember my dad playing this record, or at least one of the songs on this record, and it always stuck with me because it was such a unique sound. And coming back to it this week, I was kind of bowled over. So the album's called Shy Chick, but it's spelled like the word psychic, but with an H after the S. So Shy Chick. And it is a really strange combination of sounds. The first song is called Cyclic, and it is the song that I remember from my childhood. And it is fast becoming one of my favorite songs. It could partially be that nostalgia that I have associated to it, but it's such a unique track. It's built around these kind of like raining organs and this grooving drum pattern. It's very krautrock, like it's very influenced by Noi and like Can, and so if that sort of aesthetic appeals to you, absolutely. If not listen to this whole album, at least listen to the song Cyclic. It's this 10-minute krautrock influenced punky jam. It has these absolutely transcendent guitars. It's an absolutely amazing piece. The rest of the record is really good too. It's very avant-garde at certain points. It won't be for everyone, but that track in particular, Cyclic off of Shy Chick, is it's a mouthful, is a really, really amazing piece of music. So no one seems to really know who this band is, Buffalo Daughter, but I wanted to shout them out because I've listened to that album a few times this week, and I think it's really something special. Also want to shout out a new record from a very promising and slowly accruing hype indie rock artist who goes by the name of Indigo D'Souza. She is a really interesting talent who has just put out a new record called Any Shape You Take, which I've really taken with, frankly. I think it's a really unique and striking indie rock record. It kind of fuses elements of bands like Hop Along and Great Grandpa, very reminiscent of Great Grandpa, actually. This very heart on sleeve, emotional, but also quite musically interesting and dense indie rock that I think will have a lot of appeal to most members of this podcast. It's a really striking, strong record. Each time I listen to it, I like it more and more. At this point, there's a distinct possibility of it showing up on my year-end list. It's a shame we didn't really get the chance to review it, but sometimes that's just the way that these things pan out. Discovered it a little bit too late, but that record is really, really good. I thoroughly recommend it. Indigo D'Souza's Any Shape You Take. Amazing. And I also want to shout out, because of a certain member of our viewership, our commenter Genmetsu Unknown, shout out to them if they're watching. They recommended a couple of weeks ago, actually, that we check out and potentially even dive into the English progressive metal band from the 70s that go by the name of Gentle Giant. And I was struck by this because I'd always heard of Gentle Giant. My dad had one of their albums on cassette, but I never really dived into them. And I checked out their pages online, and they seem to have one of the most consistently highly rated discographies in all of classic prog. And so I'm like, why have I never really listened to this band? And so I listened to their first album, the self-titled record from 1970, and it was really good, really, really like excellent. The closest comparison I can think of is King Crimson, but it's definitely carves out its own musical niche. Apart from that, it's really groovy, it's really distinct, it's really concise as well. 35-40 minute prog record with no fluff and straight to the point, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm gonna dig through the rest of the Gentle Giant discography, since basically they put out basically a record every year in the 70s and then kind of retired after that. But apparently, according to Genmetsu Unknown, our commenter, they're still active online even 50 years later. So that's really cool to hear. So I will be diving deeper into their discography, so our listener will be pleased to hear, and I'll report as I go my thoughts on each record that I listen to. But yeah, promising start. And I think that is basically all I have to report. August, what have you been listening to?
Well, the first thing I've been listening to is going to be my name check for today of a band whose name I can't pronounce. The early 2000s down-tempo band, and I'm sure Tyler knows what I'm alluding to.
I do.
Ruksoyup?
I think it's Rixop.
Ruksopp. Okay.
I don't
We'll
know
go
for
with
sure
that.
there.
But their record Melody AM, which I thought was a really this was really solid, like early 2000s kind of down tempo stuff, because I was kind of in the kick of listening to a lot of mellower stuff this week. I was going back to some older records I liked in a similar style, like Air's Moon Safari, And I stumbled onto this mainly because of a recommendation from Mason of Glacier Flower.
Taste King.
And he got me into this, and yeah, it's just really solid. Really good. The singles here are, while they are so monumentally good with tracks like Porlino and Remind Me, there are so many just good deeper cuts in this album that make the whole experience so worth sitting through and just worth listening to. I really did like it for that.
Yeah, it's quite a coincidence because I believe that album turned 20 yesterday from the day that we're recording this. And it's also like, I was delighted to hear, for our listeners, I was delighted to hear that August was listening to this, because this was a childhood record of mine. My dad was really into Reeksop when they first came about, and he had Melody AM, Melody AM on CD. And I have very vivid childhood memories of listening to this alongside another down-tempo band that I've also recommended to August, that I'll share my recommendation with all of you, which is the band Lemon Jelly and their record Lost Horizons, which is very much in a similar vein. But anyway, digression. Melody AM rules. It's great.
Yeah.
The down-tempo genre in general, which had a real sort of boom in that early 2000s period, has really a lot of really underrated records in that world that deserve more exposure.
Yeah. And it's just real. A lot of the stuff I've heard in that style just manages to be so emotionally impactful and delicate and beautiful, with just such kind of almost rudimentary, simple ideas that are taken so far in such interesting directions. And I really care for that sound. Another thing, from kind of a tangential connection to Glacier Flower, the artist Lynn's Heaven Virtual Plaza. This is a vaporwave ambient artist who has another project called Mount Shrine, which Mason and I were big in listening to during the production of Glacier Flower 21. And I listened to some of their other material under their main Lynn's Heaven Virtual Plaza name, mainly because I had recently learned they had passed away from COVID-19 earlier this year, unfortunately. And I listened to their kind of double ambient album Rainforest Hill, which is split into two parts, Rainforest Hill 1 and Rainforest Hill 2, released over about 6 months in 2018, excuse me. And this is, while I don't think all of it is consistently exciting or terribly interesting versions of the sound they're going for, this very heavily nature-inspired tribal ambient, there are moments on these two albums where they reach really interesting highs, like Ember Valley, Tropical Test Map, and the track and the title track Rainforest Hill. And these songs together are long enough to be their own 30-minute album. And so it's something where I wish these projects were trimmed down a little so I could really call them great rather than just being something I enjoy a fair bit. But as they are, I think there's still interesting looks into the world of kind of vaporwave coming off of its peak of popularity and what artists were doing with that. Continuing with this kind of vaporwave track, which evidently was my kick this week, I listened to the record Atmospheres 1 by the band Echo Virtual. This is a 20-minute long album with 10 tracks. And what's interesting here is a lot of the beats I think are really interesting, really good. Like Cumulus Fractus, Acid Rain, and I really enjoy the closer Troposphere. my big gripe here is that it's just, I feel it didn't take the ideas it had far enough for me to call it like something, once again, where I like it, I just don't love it in the way I feel I should be able to if these ideas were extended and broadened upon a little more within this album, but it is what it is. Last thing, new release from the band Turnstile, their album Glow On. Post-hardcore album. It's got really interesting, unique production for its sound. What I kind of compared it to, and this was mainly based on the appearance of like Blood Orange on this album. I thought a lot of like contemporary R&B and that sound influencing how this record sounds, which was something very unique and interesting for a post-hardcore record to do and to pull off pretty well, I thought. Definitely a record that is not as consistently good all the way through, and that some tracks suffer from being a couple drafts away from a final product, I feel. But as a whole, I do really like this. It kicks ass and it's a fun time. And it's short, so listen to it.
Beautiful. All right. Well, that leads us in then to our first review of the day, which is Chvrches are a Scottish synth pop band who've been around for 10 years now. According to their Ratty music page, anyway, they were formed in September 2011, which would make this month their 10th anniversary as a band. And they've had a really interesting career. So it's a trio consisting of frontwoman Lauren Mayberry, and then producers, multi-instrumentalists, synthesizer kings, Martin Doherty and Ian Cook. We have obviously talked about our proclivity for various forms of Scottish indie music on this podcast in the past, some of which does incorporate synthesizers pretty heavily. Like I think of the most recent Twilight Sad record, for instance, as being a kind of part of this lineage and sound. But anyway, Chvrches broke through into the indie world off of the back of some very successful SoundCloud singles shortly after they formed, songs like The Mother We Share and Lies, and then released a quite successful debut record, The Bones of What You Believe, in 2013. And ever since then, with each successive record, it has been tweaking that sound to varying degrees, with varying results as well. I'm particularly fond of their second record, Every Open Eye, but their third record, Love Is Dead, was pretty underwhelmingly received. Just generally speaking, it was seen as a bit of a step down and slightly less focused, and with some experimentation that kind of missed the mark more often than succeeded. And so it was an interesting diversion for the band, but it feels like with this new record, Screen Violence, which is their fourth album, they have come back with a sound that very much feels as sharp and punctual as it ever has, and an interesting concept to boot. I'll leave it there, but what do you guys think of this new Chvrches record?
I love it. It's weird because honestly, Chvrches were actually one of the first bands I ever really got into, because I believe Morgan really got into them around the time we met, and he kind of got me into them with their Recover EP, which is pretty solid shit. And the returning, like going back to their music is like I love a lot of their individual songs, and I do really like that first album a whole lot, but they've never been a band for me that have truly capitalized on their potential, I don't think. I mean, at least only by my measure. It's just like that first album, while I do like it, while I do think it's good, feels just like a collection of good songs. It has some overarching shared ideas and themes, but it's also just, you can tell that they're very early on in their sound. There's nothing in like those first couple projects that they had that aren't kind of indicative of their influences, I guess. Not that they're like a band that needs to be terrifically original or anything, but I've liked them. It's just that, like, in the past, and even on an album like their last one, Love Is Dead, which I was definitely more, even though I'm kind of mixed on it, I was definitely more fond of than most people. But like, they've always had a sensibility about them where they really they just really lean into the electronic and kind of artificiality of their sound, and they kind of find an identity in that, which can lead to some of their music feeling a little bit stilted for me. And I've always wanted them to be a little bit more flexible or vulnerable, just the slightest bit more just less impenetrable, I think, both emotionally and sonically. And Screen Violence here is honestly just like, hey, here's everything you ever wanted out of this band. It's a tight 10 tracks, a lean 43 minutes, and I love almost every song on here. Bare minimum, like, I really, I mean, I maybe I'm sure I'm not going to be the only one who likes this song, but I'm definitely the only person I've seen who loves this song in, I guess that's just the severity that I do. But one of the singles, How Not to Drown, which features Robert Smith of The Cure, is, oh my God. That's my second favorite song of the year, only behind a song off of Glacier Flower. I have listened to this song a hell of a lot. Not just because Robert Smith's vocal chemistry with Lauren is great, which it is. Dude is just like, I don't know how that man has managed to keep his voice sounding exactly the same since the 80s, but whatever like fucking blood sacrifices he's doing, keep on doing it, Rob. You're great. But How Not to Drown is like, it's such a distinctly macabre song, which they're not strangers to darkness or anything, but it gave me the impression that this album was going to be sort of a tonal shift for them, and it certainly is. The entire record here is mired in not only like emotional darkness and just a generally darker palette than the songs they've made in the past, but it's also filled with allusions to things like horror cinema and like iconography that you wouldn't find outside. I mean, it's got a song called Final Girl, which is riddled with references
also
like
worth
that.
noting as well that one song on this record, I can't remember which one, was remixed by John Carpenter.
That, oh my
Girls.
God.
Good
Holy
Girls.
shit.
Yeah, it was remixed by John Carpenter.
Well, need to get on that because wow, that's perfect. I didn't even really make the connection to like his soundtrack work, but now that you mentioned that, it's just like, wow, that's a lot. This shares a lot in common with that. But the general vibe of the record I find is on How Not to Drown, where it's like, and Tyler mentioned the Twilight Sad, and like lyrically speaking, it definitely feels like they're trying to channel their Scottish contemporaries here. It's a fucking brutal, just absolutely at times harrowing song about being in a relationship with an unfair power dynamic. And that's a lot of the focus on this album too, is that it's really thematically focused on the idea of like not even an abusive relationship, but just a relationship that is like taking both people in it down with them. And it just sort of, you just kind of plunge into this descent as the album keeps going and going. It has those more upbeat moments like especially towards the end, Better If You Don't and Good Girls, are like, they have a kind of triumphant fatalism about them. But there's also songs like He Said, She Said, California, Violent Delights, and How Not to Drown, which are all just kind of mired in this. And yeah, How Not to Drown is definitely my favorite song on here. It's like, I just love how their voices mix together. I love how deep and fucking like sensuous this song sounds, but like it literally does feel like you are drowning in an ocean of this sound. And the lyrics on here are just positively gut-wrenching, nauseating occasionally. But there's a part where it just kind of like the final minute of the song, it just kind of like ends and just sort of like echoes out, and it's just that moment just really anchors me into the rest of the record. And it's I know this is an unpopular take, but I really love the song He Said, She Said. I think that song, like,
Oh, it's great.
It's
so
only
good.
the tinges of hyperpop that come in on this track that happen when like the really big chorus refrain comes in, it's just like, oh fuck yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That explains my disconnect.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Oof.
it like legitimately just sounds like part of it. It could have, like, it sounds like it's partially mixed by the person who did the last Charlie album. It just sounds very similar. And it has that kind of energy there. That's kind of all over the record, but like the only moment the album doesn't like fully have me, which this I guess is my unpopular take, is the first track, Asking for a Friend, which I think musically, like, it's a good song. Do not misinterpret me at all. The music here bucks. I love the structure of this song. I love the immaculate build that this has. It's like all of these songs are so tightly structured and so like perfect that I wouldn't have them any other way. Asking for a Friend is the only time the lyrics actually bother me, because like I don't like, this is probably just a me thing, but like Chvrches have never been a band where I've been keen to pay attention to the lyrics too much, because frankly, in a lot of their earlier work, it's like, what? Like, some of it's just a bit too like esoteric, and frankly a lot of it's just really vague to the point where it's just like, just enjoy it for the music, man. And I do, and the hooks are good, but a lot of the stuff here is a little bit like, you know, like the whole metaphor, like the you know, the lip syncing ships and the whole like it's like the rest of the album does such a great job of balancing this sort of pop appeal and this instant hookiness with the lyrics, but also being like tangibly emotional, but like, you know, not in a way that like weighs it down, and not in a way that like sacrifices either side of it. And this song, just like, I like the sentiment of it, but just the way it's expressed lyrically feels a bit like, I don't want to say immature, but it just feels a little bit like, I don't know, this could have used a little bit more time.
Me and Tyler fucking tumbling over here.
I mean, like, I just, it's like the structure and actual sound of it, especially that final second, the second half of it is fucking terrific. But like, I like, you know, the first verse where it's just like, you know, and the songs I wrote about hearts I broke would never come for free. I cheated and I lied, but I meant it when I cried. It's just like, I could almost do with it being a little bit less direct here. It just feels a bit like the rest of the album to me feels so honest, but it also feels like there's also a real authorial penmanship behind it. Whereas this feels like a little bit too, like, I know it's weird for me of all people to complain about something being too hard on sleeve, but just like, just a little bit of like, there's just the song doesn't do a good job of miring itself in the same mood and tone as the rest of the record for me. It's like, if you compare this lyrically to something like How Not to Drown, it loses something really, really distinct that I love about the rest of the record for me. But it's such a small complaint. I really love this thing. And I think it's the best project they've made by a mile. I think it's the most thematically focused. I think it's the most like accessible but also defined sound that they've worked with. And every song here, just to some degree or another, absolutely works on both a musical level and an emotional one. And it's like, yes, finally, this is the Chvrches album I have been waiting for this whole time, and I'm happy that it's finally here.
Chvrches are at an interesting juncture in their career, and something I want to pick up on is the notion of lyricism in Chvrches records as well, because they are functionally a synth pop band, and I agree with Jake to a certain extent that in the past their lyrics have kind of not necessarily been something which I zero my focus in on when I listen to the music. I think they've never been unimportant, and I think especially if we're going to talk about what works or doesn't work about this record, we do need to acknowledge them, and particularly the fact that, as Jake has alluded to, there's a lot more kind of focus in them here for the large part, and even a kind of conceptual framework that they exist in. But yeah, you're right to a certain extent. Like in the past, their music has been this propulsive synth pop that Lauren Mabry has been a great vocal presence over top of, but it hasn't necessarily had the, I guess, lyrical prowess to really wow. And that was a criticism that came to the fore a lot when people were discussing the last record, because that was a record where in particular a lot of the lyricism began to feel quite repetitive, and that was something that was harder to ignore when the music was moving in that direction as well. And so what I think is interesting about Screen Violence is that not only do Chvrches sound reinvigorated as a band, but Lauren sounds like she has this kind of greater sense of purpose as a lyricist, as a songwriter, than she ever has before. And I think that regardless of my ultimate feelings on this record, even if I don't love it to the full extent of my favorite Chvrches records, that is an aspect of the album that really works in its favor, I think. And that is absolutely baked into it right down to the concept. So this kind of goes back a lot of the ideas that this record is rooted in are the feelings, I guess, and that contribute to the reason why it sounds the way it does, are rooted in struggles that have, I guess, defined Chvrches' entire career, and Lauren's experience as a woman fronting a synth pop band that became successful in the indie sphere. And that is that she has been the target of a lot of abuse, criticism, general misogyny, just horrific stuff, where her presentation, her personality, her decision to dress the way that she wants to dress, really like basic shit, has been thrown against her by audiences, and just generally there's been a lot of just awful shit that has been directed Lauren's way, and she's been very vocal about it the whole time that they've been a band, and she's been very kind of strident and aggressive in her approach to shutting it down. And she spoke as well about, during the tour for their last record, Love Is Dead, in 2019, that kind of coming to a head in specific incidents where she was criticized for dressing in a way that was too revealing on stage. And this kind of led to a brief sort of brouhaha that was certainly not the first time Lauren had to deal with this, but it was kind of a breaking point sort of thing. And as a result, you have reflections of the emotions that brought out, and that boiling point led to, all across this album, both in the lyrics and in this generally aggressive way that it sounds. You have these drum sounds on this record that are fucking serrating, they're sharp, they're violent. And you have synthesizers and even a greater incorporation of guitar on this record in a way that really fills the soundscape and gets in your head. And I think there's no greater, I guess, example of this record's identity and this record's doing what it's meant to do as a result of those things than he said, she said, which Jake has described beautifully. The way that the song sounds so aggressive, the clear hyperpop influence, and then the specific lyrical subject matter as well, complementing that, where she talks about the hypocritical pressures that are placed on her to look and act a certain way. Martin Doherty has spoken about trying to capture the tension of a mounting panic attack with the instrumentation of this song, which leads to this propulsive explosion at the chorus that doesn't resolve the melody, but kind of just lets it pop. And Lauren is repeating and then having echoed in a distorted tone that line of, "I feel like I'm losing my mind." It really puts you in her headspace of the mounting, little microaggressions that are leading
that's
to
such a fucking awesome moment. I fucking love that part where it's just like it literally sounds like she is just freaking the fuck out on that song, and it's like the slightly pitch shifted vocals there, and it just, the drums just fucking blow up, and I'm like, oh yeah, let's go.
Yeah, it feels like a really sort of genuine moment of catharsis. And
Yes.
that, I think, is the strongest aspect of this record, is that
Mhm.
it really feels like a record of catharsis for Chvrches as a band, for Lauren as a writer, and in every way as an experience to listen to. It is cathartic in the same way as a lot of the really explosive and ugly and violent movies that it kind of obliquely references are, and that serve the same sort of purpose of giving you this kind of real full body thrill. And that is something that really, I think the Chvrches have sorely needed to capture. I mean, when I think of my favorite moments on Chvrches records, like my favorite moments on Chvrches records are like the really explosive opening tracks of Every Open Eye and clear a song like Clearest Blue, where it just has this enormous synthesizer explosion. And that sort of blood pumping aspect of Chvrches music has been missing from a lot of what they've been doing. And Jake's kind of alluded to that, even if I ultimately feel probably more positive overall on the early music, I still agree to a certain extent that the real grit that makes Chvrches' best stuff compelling has been something they have really needed to hone for a while. And I think that they've done really, really powerfully here. There's a real tense aggression in the beat on a song like Violent Delights as well, which is, I think Martin spoke about being influenced by The Prodigy on this track, which is a kind of big beat 90s UK rave band that basically embody the kind of maximalism in dance music that this record channels at certain points. And it's also easy to see why when the band sent Robert Smith the songs on this record, he chose How Not to Drown to sing on top of specifically. It's easy to see why he did that, because it is one of the best songs here. I totally agree. I love those blocky, again, I've talked about the drum sound of this record just being so like aggressive, and it's really blocky and distorted and hard hitting. The wailing nightmare synths that form the bedrock of this song too are really kind of like gloomy and menacing. And as I've said, though in the past, Chvrches' lyrics have usually been one of the lesser attention-grabbing parts of their music, the lyrics on this song are nicely sort of dark and thorny, and that chorus has a real hooky aspect to it that despite this being a longer, less intense and more sort of dreary track, like that dreary tone is so like in keeping with The Cure. And I mean, one of the other reasons why I brought up Twilight Sad before earlier, even though they're obviously very distinct bands, is that they are both bands that happen to have this kind of get a Robert Smith cosign at this exact moment in their career where they're really fusing this heavy synthesizer influence into songs that have a bedrock of guitar and channeling this real darkness. And the darkness is interesting as well, because I actually think, in slight contrast to Jake, I actually think that the sort of darkness has always been a fundamental part of Chvrches. Like, I think Lauren has always had this interest in really like getting into this darker psychological place across all of their records. Love Is Dead, despite that title, is maybe the kind of exception, because that record is a little more fluffy, weirdly enough. But I think Chvrches have always had this kind of real, I don't want to say it's vaguely emo influenced sensibility to just the general tone. And the way that some of their music reaches for catharsis, even on a record like Bones of What We Believe. But that's much more kind of coherent, and they lean into that darkness much more vividly here on this album. And I'll come to the defense of Asking for a Friend without trying to be antagonistic, because I can see why some would have some of the issues with the lyricism. But I think personally that it has some of the most compelling lyrics of the record. And I like the fact that it opens the album in this really emotionally intense place. Because it is opening a record with Lauren essentially at her lowest. Like, this is a record where for a lot of it, Lauren is raging against these subjects of mistreatment toward her. But this is a song that opens the record in a really kind of vulnerable place for her. And I do think that there might be an occasional line like Sinking Ships with Selfish Lips that do feel like a little bit of some of Lauren's lesser pointed tendencies, but I do find a genuine pathos in lines like the record opening with, I don't want to say that I'm afraid to die, I'm no good at goodbyes, I can't apologize. I like that the record opens with, I don't want to say that I'm afraid to die either, because that immediately kind of grounds you in this horror aesthetic, because you're immediately confronting mortality. And even
that's
though
actually to add on to your point there, that's why I find the second half of this song to be so much more poignant than the first half, is that it's like once the music really gets going, and once you have that repetition of You Still Matter, which, by the way, that's a fucking stellar moment. love that. But then once you get the lyrics at the end that says, I don't want to say that I'm afraid to die, the past isn't the past, it isn't meant to last, like that part is like, oh, when the song gets going and when it's in the midst of this repetition, then it really works for me. And it's just like, it's in a bit of a contrast of just like, it happens earlier on the song where I'm not as into it, and then later once it happens and the song is like fucking soaring, like, oh god, I love the second half of this song. To try and put a fucking band-aid on that comment, I guess it's great, and I love that moment.
No, I totally understand where you're coming from. And yeah, the song, the way the song builds and then explodes, and that refrain of "You Still Matter" is, it's really poignant as well, because this is a song about Lauren sort of self-reflecting and being very much kind of like introspective and like, I fucked all this up, I've done this wrong, I've done that, and really kind of getting into that place where it's like when you have let someone down and you just get all like you don't mean to, but you make it all about yourself and your self-loathing. And then the chorus is like an acknowledgement that she does genuinely care about how the other person in the situation is feeling, and in fact makes their, you know, existence the main emotional thrust of the song. So it again, it's a synth pop song. It is what it is, but I think that within it is some real kind of emotional intelligence and development that I like quite a lot.
It's got a nuance that the rest of the record totally has too. I think this is an album that's not just like, you know, not to say that it's wrong when people write songs about abusive relationships and they say how it affects them. This is an album where it's very much aware of the fact that, like, you know, Lauren is self-conscious about the fact that it's not entirely whoever the person she's singing about's fault. Like, she's very much aware that it's like a flux between the two of them, and that there's an emotional nuance there that's like, maybe it's like still mostly geared sympathetically towards her, as like it probably should be, but there's a complexity there that I feel like is important. It's not just like always in one mode, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, and I think it is important that she makes herself vulnerable at the head of this record before she gets into a lot of what the rest of it is about. And yeah, and so to touch on a couple of more songs, I'm not going to talk about every song on this record, but my other favorite song beside from the opener is Final Girl. And
great song.
I want to discuss this song for a bit as well, because I'm typically hesitant to fully embrace pop songs that are solely about the meta aspect of a singer's struggle with their art and success, especially if those are pop songs. But the way to do that is to really throw yourself into it. And perhaps the way that, if you want to draw it back to last week, the way that Lord didn't, is that you have to really throw yourself into it as much as possible and create something that grabs the listener and shakes them hard. And Final Girl does that. It has, again, I've talked about this drum sound, but these are maybe the most loud and raucous drums of the whole record. And this great jangling guitar line, very Cure influenced. You can totally tell that lineage coming through. I absolutely adore. It feels like one of the most fleshed out and finessed and addictive pop songs that Chvrches have made. And the application of the Final Girl horror movie trope to the world of pop music has the potential to come across as hokey, but I think it benefits from not being hammered on too much. It's more of kind of an extra detail in the song.
It's pretty subtle, all things considered.
Yeah, exactly. And it also ties in really nicely to the "Good girls don't die, good girls stay alive" refrain of the next track, which also mirrors that conceptual thing, which is a typical Chvrches rager that, like He Shed, Sea Shed, he sold seashells by the seashore. Good Girls and He Said, She Said, which were both singles. Both of these songs bring Lauren's experiences and pressures in the industry to the fore. And Good Girls works as a kind of complement track to Final Girl, in that it answers the question of whether Lauren should shut up and retire, as she ponders on that song, with a resounding "fuck no." It's a very like
contemplating if you need to log off.
Yeah. And I think that I have some reservations with some of the lyrics of Good Girls, but that when that chorus comes in, it's such a very satisfying arrival for that song. And melodically. So I am broadly positive overall. I do think the record loses its steam a little bit beyond this point. Lullabies, I want to shout out, is a song that's actually inspired by one of my favorite bands of the 80s, which is a band called the Blue Nile. I don't think that it quite matches them, unfortunately. And the reason for this is that I think Lauren's voice, as much as I generally like it, just doesn't really gel with the more glacial and nocturnal atmosphere of the Blue Nile that they're trying to capture on this song. It's not a bad song. At points, it reminds me of similar tones that the 1975 captured, much better on some of the deep cuts of their second album. But overall, it kind of isn't something that stands out, and unfortunately, and nor does Nightmares either for me. I think that's a song where Lauren also sounds kind of vocally strained in the chorus. It just doesn't do a lot for me musically, though I do appreciate how it fits into and fleshes out the horror movie concept that the record broadly leans into. It's kind of a meta song about how much Lauren hates to keep writing about relationships, but also how much they keep defining her emotional state. And she doesn't really do much to resolve that tension. It just kind of feels like Lauren is tired. That said, I think the closing track, Better If You Don't, which feels incidentally like one of maybe the least Chvrches song that the band have ever made, in a good way. It's kind of a dreary post-punk ballad that strips back a lot of the layered intensity that has just begun to drown the mixing of the record. And as such, it serves as a really deserved and suitable reprieve at the closing marks. It has also, I want to say, I think this song has the best lyrics of the whole record. Really moving song. They feel genuinely confessional and heartfelt, and they avoid mere sentiment, which Lauren can be guilty of leaning into, for a kind of cutting honesty. Some of these lines like, drinking to the things I can't take back, thinking of the friends and faith I lack, and no one broke my heart quite like that, man. It's better if you don't care, but if you do, I won't follow you again. A great sort of lyrical passage, and this sort of dwelling on relationships and drinking gets more powerful towards the end as well. Tinseltown was always in the rain. I've been gone and I notice every change. And some of them are not our friends. And some of them are still our friends, but dead. It's better if I don't think too much of you. I've been on my own, so I should see it through. I mumble when I speak, but I mean it when I do. I carry what I keep. I don't miss a lot of you. I drink and I think too much. I should quit one of the two, but I won't wish for luck and I won't bother you. It's better if you don't care, but if you do, I won't follow you again. It's a really moving song. That feels like one of the real sense of moving forward and even a bit of grief in this song, that it feels like one of the most honest emotions that's expressed on this whole record, which isn't to denigrate the other emotions, but it's just to say that I think it ends the record in a really strong place. And so, yeah, I do. There are some songs that don't work as much for me, but broadly, I think this is the smart move for Chvrches in terms of sound. And I'm pleased to see Lauren sort of developing as a writer more so than she has in the past, and certainly bouncing back from some of the platitudes of Love Is Dead. So, yeah, I'm broadly pretty positive on this.
I hope you have fun in gay hell for unfavorably comparing this to the 1975.
It was one element of one song, and they're both leaning on a very similar point of influence. So,
and hell is still hot, bitch.
Fair enough.
Is it? I don't know what it was.
Tell him I'm coming.
On this note,
Hell's coming with me.
Oh, God.
I am hell, and wherever I am, there must hell be. Anyway,
oh damn.
On this note, I want to hone in on the horror movie aspects of this album.
Because of course we do.
Wow, we both.
No, this is that I say jestingly, but this is exactly why you're here.
Thank you.
All of us being just disgustingly on brand today.
I mean, look, I just published a 2K review of Censor, and it intersects very much with my thoughts on this record.
Saoirse said, fucking, you said we're on brand? Double down, bitch!
Wow. But it's interesting that, like, something like He Said, She Said is a song that I took less to be about a relationship with the media, but about a very toxic person, without knowing.
I think it's both.
Yeah.
like it just captures so many narratives of horrible relationships with other people for me, controlling relationships with other people. The idea of encouraging someone to fit your view of how they should look whilst telling them not to, or like still be a cool girl, to quote Gone Girl in a way, you know.
I mean, yeah, keep an eye on your waistline. Just be like, oh God, I've heard people say shit like that before.
Yeah. You know, be fed but don't be obsessed.
Yeah,
but it's yeah, exactly right. So the whole album for me conjures the story about this, as Jake said, very toxic relationship, and the whole screen violence thing. Like the album cover is drenched in neon Dario Argento red with what looks like a television screen with someone's hand as if they're being murdered in a horror film pressed up against blinds. Like
what a
it's
good
very,
album
like,
cover.
It's very reminiscent of like that Psycho. Is it the Psycho poster that has that sort of hand
Yeah.
outstretched on it?
Yeah.
I was thinking it's almost like a pastiche of the level of like the opening scene of Blowout or something, you know,
Yeah.
like
yeah,
Totally.
but yeah. And so that it's almost for me like it feels like this album is like, go with me on this, it's like reclaiming the image of the rape revenge narrative in a more abstract fashion, of course. But this album feels to me like it's very aggressive, like brutal, and it's like, I'm going to take this person who has hurt me, and this album is going to be an act of revenge on them by bringing them out in public and dragging them, you know. It almost feels like a public castration in a way, this album, in like the best way possible. And that it's like, look, you shitty person, I'm going to take you here and list all of your faults and the things you did to me in blood.
I mean, like, there's basically on like How Not to Drown, there's the lyric, you promised the world and brought me it hanging from a string, stuck it in my mouth into my throat and told me to sing. I'm just like, that's a saw trap. Jesus.
But I mean, the moments where it leans into that, I find so like electric, and like just the idea of like framing yourself as a final girl has a lot of power in itself. Like has a lot of men, women, and chainsaws energy. That's something for the hardcore horror fans out there. And the song itself does such a good job of unpicking exactly what that means. When they do lean into it, boy, do I love it. And it's like, if you know, like, your shit in this area, it's like they've just taken a trope and it's like they're doing an autopsy where they're opening it up and checking out all of like the lungs and the organs and figuring out how they work and how they apply to how the thing stays alive and how it applies to life and you, and just I love it.
Yeah,
I adore this album, shockingly, considering that I adore all but one of Chvrches' albums, and this is another fucking home run as far as I'm concerned. The only thing on it that I don't care for is he said, she said. I hate that I have to knock a Mayberry vocal performance, but it does nothing for me here. And you know, hyperpop Charlie XCX influence. I just go fashion the news. Anyway.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.
I hope we can agree. It's better than Miracle, at least. I hope you'll agree, Morgan.
What did I just walk in on? Like
a normal episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, Serge. I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
They're that and Miracle bad in entirely different ways. So yeah, probably, but like
that's okay. I won't make you lean on this anymore.
Everything else ranges from very solid to some of this band's absolute best work for reasons that have been elaborated on quite well by pretty much everyone previous, particularly in the back and forth, actually. So I won't belabor any points there.
Where would you rank it in your discog, Morgan?
I'd still have Bones at number 1, and then this right below it, followed by the natural order.
Sick,
come
indeed.
in with the Love Is Dead hot take.
All right.
I will say up front, I do think Lauren Mayberry, I believe her name is, she's a really good vocalist. I think she's a great front woman for this band. She's got this real like 15-year-old girl type voice is what it sounds like. In my opinion, for the most part, kind of the heart and soul of the album and what the works are here. That is to say, I quite enjoyed her as a front woman. I really liked the parts of the production that took the darkest parts, the darkest edges, and cranked them up as high as possible. Like on the kind of subject of How Not to Drown, which was my personal favorite song here too. I really do like this song's sense of storytelling. It felt really interesting and unique in the context of the album. And Robert Smith having a co-writing credit on this song, I think definitely contributes to that unique feel. And I certainly enjoy a lot of moments on this album. I find the hooks they lay down, they tend to, capture me well enough. Some are weaker than others. I am not a terrible fan of the opener, the "Can we celebrate the end? I'm asking for a friend" being a nice Biffy Clyro evocation right out the gate.
Wow. The also Scottish.
Also Scottish. God fucking damn
that's
it.
bait.
I definitely found a couple of the hooks to be really spammed in place of just another verse or something a little more fleshed out, which I would have liked. But
one thing I'll add on that note, just because I forgot to say it really quickly, is that even though it has one of my favorite instrumentals on this album by far, I find Violent Delights to be really underwhelming lyrically and kind of just a bit stale. And I wish that song had, the ideas in that song had been expressed a little bit better, because it has such a great instrumental, and then it's just these violent delights keep creeping into my nights. I can't sing.
That is a good example of a song where I feel they could have taken it a little further, and I would have gotten a little more out of it. The one final thing I do have to say is I also couldn't help but be a little annoyed by like every song starting with this AAABB rhyme scheme, or at least quite a couple of them where I was just like, okay, can you please do a hook a little differently? But I don't know, this was not really ever going to be a record for me, but that's also not to say I don't appreciate a lot of elements about it and a lot of things that go into it. That's about all I got for this one.
Jams and Tea podcast pro tiny Scottish woman. Love to see that.
Are we ever not?
Fair.
Taking a hard stance on this one. Very fond.
We like the Scots.
Good
Hey,
musicians.
Favorite tracks and ratings.
Yeah.
Jake, lead us off.
3 favorite tracks are How Not to Drown being my number 1. Expect that to land very highly on my list this year. Better If You Don't. And yeah, I will say He Said, She Said. I think that's kind of a perfect pop song, IMO. But yeah, least favorite, by a very slim margin, Asking for a Friend. Song I still enjoy. And I give this record 9 out of 10. Probably undersold my liking for it a little bit, frankly. But yeah, this has been on rotation this week.
Yes. My 3 favorite tracks here are How Not to Drown, Final Girls, and I don't know, He Said, She Said I didn't find completely unbearable. Anyway.
Devastating example of damning with faint praise there.
Yeah.
August Nelson, noted Charlie XCX enjoyer.
Least favorite, I don't know, Asking for a Friend, I'd give it a 5 out of 10.
Appreciate
I see what you did there.
Black MIDI. It's like what they did.
Yeah, I gotta change it up.
That was smart. That was smart.
Thank you. Thank you.
Morgan.
My three favorites are Asking for a Friend, Final Girl, and the third favorite has changed like 5 times now. So I'm just going to go with the current one, which is California. A song we didn't talk about very much. but one
Yeah,
I
good ass
enjoyed
song, by the
quite a
way.
lot.
That's a
Really
great
good.
fucking song.
Least favorite, he said, she said, and 9 out of 10.
Three
My
favorite
favorite
tracks.
tracks. Yeah, they are Good Girls, How Not to Drown, and California. Least favorite track, Asking for a Friend. It's getting an 8 from me.
Okay. My 3 favorite tracks are Asking for a Friend, Final Girl, and Better If You Don't. I'm going to put in the third spot, actually. Least favorite track is Nightmares, I think. And I was thinking about this, and then when I ended up putting it in my ranking, is that this album, in terms of the positive feelings I have, they're mostly positive feelings I have, and then some of the reservations, reminds me, even though it's a very different sounding record, of how I feel about the Wolf Alice album that we reviewed earlier this year as well. And so I'm going to give it a similar rating. I'm going to give it a 7.
Awesome. That's an average of 7.6 out of 10, which is the same as Nothing Left to Love by Counterparts, The Mollusk by Ween, Deftones by Deftones,
Halloween.
amongst Halloween by Halloween, Octahedron by the Mars Volta, amongst others.
Okay.
A lot of Morgan core.
All right. Well, in that case,
Known octahedron listener.
in that case, let's move forward to our second review
boy.
of the day, which is for
Between Buried and Me, notable progressive metal / metalcore act formed in Raleigh, North Carolina in the year 2000. And this Colors 2, as you might imagine, is a follow-up to what's probably their most acclaimed record, which I have right here. This is the first time they've done this, technically, because, I mean, there was an Automata 2, but that's just the second half of one album that they split up for some stupid fucking reason.
Yeah.
and there's the
So-
Parallax duology as well, I guess. I don't know if that's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, but one of them's an EP, so
Right.
like the
Yeah.
first one's just 3 songs. So it's this is the first time that it's really meant a lot. Like they're meant as 2 separate entities that are
Yeah.
related as opposed to sort of interlinked releases.
And I guess maybe the biggest difference as well is that they come at very distinct points in the band's discography and eras of their sound as well, despite being connected by that title and relationship.
Yeah. I think the MO of Colors 1 was to just for this band to push themselves pretty much as far as they felt that they could at the time. I think one would be hard pressed to disagree with that point, or disagree with the fact that they succeeded in such an escapade, whether that falls short of the mark of what you want or not. And I think Colors 2, more so than things like lyrics or ideas, is a spiritual successor to its predecessor, in that sense of complete and utter forward moving, bizarre, just creativity, boundless creativity within this genre sphere.
I guess, like, how do you feel like it compares to, I guess, the band's more recent work? Do you feel like it has more in common with what they've been doing, I guess, in the last decade? Or do you feel like it is a return to the specific sound of Colors?
No, I definitely think it's more in keeping with things like Automata, and just in the sense that there's much more melody on Colors 2 than there is on the original Colors. That doesn't mean it's by any stretch conventional at any point, really, but there's certainly there's a much heavier electronic focus that they've been incorporating during the 2010s, really. But it's also much of in spiritual keeping with the first Colors, which makes it more sort of cohesive in that sense since they decided to use that name.
One thing that struck me listening to it this week, because I also made a point to listen to Coma Ecliptic this week as well, just to get a sense of, how the band's sound has progressed over the years. And like, I think like that record, although much more so on this one, you get a greater sense of like a lineage of progressive rock influence as well as progressive metalcore influence as well. Like there's a real presence of like acoustic guitars and like, I guess more instrument, which is not to say it's unique in that regard for the band, but like it is a great incorporation of a lot of progressive rock instrumentation into this kind of heavier sphere that gives it this real diversity of sound and diversity of instrumentation within most of the songs on it, which is, makes it a little bit more palatable for an 80-minute record, which is you don't necessarily want to have 80 minutes that is exclusively the band's kind of screaming. I mean, some fans might want that 80 minutes of just like pure screaming heaviness, but it is the density and detail of texture and I guess swell of a lot of the arrangements that in the record's best moments really makes it more captivating where it could otherwise be monotonous.
Yeah, I think if the record was going to run this long, which I mean, it's important to keep in mind that it's only like 8 or 10 minutes shorter than the first one, or longer, that is. But it certainly feels like it's covering a lot more ground. And also just goes to show that they're not just dredging up the success of Colors and trying to replicate that. Because it does feel different. Like this sounds like something they couldn't have made in 2007, and Colors doesn't sound like something they could have made in 2021.
Yeah, it doesn't just feel like the next Between the Buried and Me album after Automata that they've just slapped Colors 2 on to get, I guess, buzz and attention. It really does feel like an evolution of where they've been at, but also like really getting in touch with a lot of the pure playfulness that really came to the fore on the original Colors and made that record so charming.
But if there's one thing I can certainly agree with what's been said is that Morgan said that this doesn't feel like an album that they could have made, at least, if you go back far enough. I think that's 100% true. I think that like in keeping of the spirit of like, you have something like Coma Ecliptic, which is an album that is considered divisive, at least among the Between the Buried and Me fan base, because that album's it's just kind of batshit. And like it gives not a single solitary fuck and is just so shameless about it, I think, and that's what leads people like me to really like it, just because it doesn't care to the point where I'm just along for the ride. And then I think the Automata duology was sort of an exercise in like the first one much more than the second. Is the Automata 1 is it feels like a lot of really well-defined singular songs that feel like they're fleshing out one particular idea. I think of songs like Yellow Eyes or Millions on those, and it's just like they don't really sound like songs that the band had made up until that point. So I think it's worth noting that, like, for a 21-year-old band, these guys have been ruthless and they're relentless creative pursuit to continuously keep pushing themselves over and over and over again. And they didn't stop at Automata. And to get into the record proper here, I love this album. I love it. I am in danger of loving it more than the first Colors, which, if you remember or watched our episode on the first Colors, I was mixed on it. In fact, when I first listened to it, I thought it was good, and like a lot of it was I could recognize the musicianship and talent and creativity at play, but none of it just really worked for me. It felt very impenetrable, and really I just kind of had to brute force my way into this discography by finding the albums that worked for me, listening to them enough so that I could get behind the band's ethos, and then working my way back through everything, which I did. And luckily I became a fully fledged fan, not a dessert. I became a fan through just being able to find what I liked about this band. And I've always like wanted to be on board with them because they're a band that, like, in theory when you look at, and like they've got all these things about them. They, they're progressive death metal, they've got metalcore, they've got all these things that I normally fuck with, and I'm just like, oh man, I really want to be able to fuck with this band. And now that I do, and Colors 2, honestly, it doesn't even really feel like a sequel to Colors solely. For me, Colors 2 is it feels like a landmark in their discography. This is a highlight reel for everything that I love about this band.
That's just basically what a point that I was going to get to, is that this is like a victory lap for their entire career thus far.
Fucking exactly. And that's why I think, your mileage will vary with this. I think that there's no denying the musicianship here. There's no denying the construction of these songs and tunes, and you can hone in on little tiny things you don't like about them. But I think that basically it's to the point where you can only dispute the quality of what's happening here so much, but it's really more or less about the fact that it's like, does this approach work for you? And thankfully, I think it does. And I've been paying really close attention to the Between the Buried and Me subreddit, because they've been listening to this and they've been fans for longer than I have. And they know these albums even better than I do. So I've been seeing it unfold and them talk about this album in real time. And one of the things that I've loved seeing is everyone finding all of these little Easter eggs and hints and references to the entire catalog of this, not just Colors, the entirety of it. There are references to things like, Decades of Statues or songs like that, but there are references to things on like Coma Ecliptic. And there, if you want to like look in and find all of these little things, it feels rewarding to have come with them this far, to a band that's so like this swamp of ideas and sounds and different records that they have. And it feels like it feels almost like giving you, there's really no like analogy that I can point to. It's really just like the epitome of having your cake and eating it too, to the point where I can easily see why this could be a little bit much, to the point where it's like, I mean, it's almost fan service in a weird way, but I don't think it's fan service that comes at the expense of quality at all. And that's what makes it so special. I actually think that pound for pound, I think that Colors 1 is a little bit more unhinged. I think that album is a little bit weirder and stranger and hard to get a grasp on. I feel like Colors 2 has not more solid fundamentals, but more easy to understand fundamentals. The risks that it takes and the digressions that it goes on are a little bit less adventurous, but they still feel a little bit more like, they still feel like robust. I think there's only like, I've listened to this album constantly. It's a long ass record, and I've been listening to it like almost every day at this point. And so I know it pretty in and out, even though it really does kind of, as Morgan alluded to, it does really all feel like one movement in some respect. And in terms of things that it's really just easier to talk about the things that I don't absolutely love than it is to talk about the things that I do love, because otherwise I'm going to sit here for hours and talk about how much I love the incredible tone setter that is Monochrome, how absolutely fucking caustic every single riff on the double helix of Extinction is, how I think that the unbelievable 1-2 punch of the euphoric sfumato into the titanic 15-minute long Human as Hell is one of the best things that this band has ever done, full stop. If there's one moment on the album that strikes me as being, that I really, really like, as being less defined than the rest of it and less great, it would probably be the song Prehistory, which serves as really more of connective tissue than it does as its own song. There's a lot of like heavy metalcore riffs here. It reminds me a lot of Alaska, which maybe that's why I don't get on with it, but it also contains, again, band like this risks, they're throwing everything at the wall. They're being goofy. They're being weird. They've never taken themselves fully seriously. They had the polka part on Colors 1, and I love that shit. But they just had to go about doing one specific idea that sticks in my craw and putting in stock sound effects in the middle of Prehistory. And I'm just like, God damn it, you guys.
There's one moment, it might even happen more than once, but I just remember one moment I picked up on it. It wasn't until my third listen. And I think the second track, where it's really low in the mix, but you can hear like an air horn at one
Fucking
particular point.
MLG air horns from 2016 memes.
Just like, I was like, fucking dudes rock.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that that's the resplendent joy I get out of something like this, because for every, like, I mean, and again, Prehistory is the only song where, like, it's a good song. I have that like a 4 out of 5 on my track ratings list, and that moment where
I love the first part of that song.
I actually think the first and last part of the song are great. I just think the middle is kind of weak, and it also contains that one part where it has the fucking Scooby-Doo tripping sound effect, which while the stock sound effect does bother me, it has made me laugh every single time, where I'm just like, you fucking guys, you fucking pranksters, I love you. And it's like, that's like Morgan said, where it's just like, it's got that fucking like air horn noise, and it's like, if that sounds like the kind of thing that's going to take you out of the experience, then like, yeah, it's going to. I can't fault anybody for that. It's in many ways, it's kind of like the polka section, even though I still just love that part of Ants of the Sky. But like, this album has moments just like that, notably this is both
medieval breakdown in fucking Never Seen Future Shock.
which by the way,
it's the juice.
Yes, fuck yes. But the one moment that is like, it's neither a complaint nor a praise, it's really more of an observation, but it's like, I didn't really know how to feel about the single Fix the Error. Like, I liked a lot of what they were doing and liked what was in it, but I was just kind of like, this just feels weird in a way that I'm not sure. Yeah, that I'm not sure works. And then you listen to it in the context of the album, and I love it. Like, isolated, that's totally
exactly what I thought too.
I thought you might actually.
Revolution in Limbo was the second single.
Yeah,
and
like,
which is a much more understandable single choice, I think.
And Revolution in Limbo. Oh my god. I fucking love this song. That's like the first album's like the part of its peak, and then I was worried that like, oh, Fix the Error is gonna follow that. Is it gonna work? And the way it's sandwiched between the two songs that it comes between, I think totally works. And it's just like, Fix the Error is just one curveball after another, and the way that like on its own, it's like it works as like a expulsion of weirdness, but in the context of the record, it's measured out perfectly to the point of where it's like, before, what came it is this perfect instrumental lead of like this really great fundamentals metalcore breakdown prog death metal shit, and it just like, and it segues into that seamlessly, and it's like, it earns the wacky weirdness that is the insane Devin Townsend, whatever the fuck you can even label this song. And then right after, it leads right back into it, like to the point where this album almost feels like, I feel like Colors 1, even though both of them are two distinctly, like they are one like song, I feel like Colors 1 has better isolated singular songs, but I feel Colors 2 almost works better as a whole, which not like by a significant margin or anything. Like I broadly have the albums rated similarly, and I like them about as much. But the thing is that it's just like, this is just such a embarrassment of riches. I feel as a fan like I'm being, not as just a fan of Between the Buried and Me, but as a fan of prog metal and shit like this, an album like this makes me feel spoiled. It makes me feel joyous. I turn this on and I get exactly what I want from not only a new Between the Buried and Me album, but it's just like every part of this album, from its construction to its lyrics to the way it sounds and the way it's produced, which, by the way, holy fuck, is this not the best sounding metal album of 2021? My goodness, this sounds fucking impeccable. These guys have never had a foot wrong when it comes to production, frankly, but this is on some new shit, and I will snort it right the fuck up. But
it's certainly the cleanest sounding metal record of the year that I've heard. Like, I'm, in terms of production, I'm like really partial to the production of something like the Panopticon record, but that production approach is totally different.
Yeah, it's really more of like the Panopticon album, which, obviously I like that one a little bit more than I like this. I like that album a little bit more than most albums. it's really more of how it fits into the whole vision of that album, whereas here it's like in a more isolated sense. I feel like this is like the cleanest. It feels not only clean, it feels like crystalline. This feels like it's a sugar rush of an album, and manages to hold its momentum the entire way through without feeling like baggy in any way for me. And maybe it's just because my brain has been weaned off of this shit for too long, but man, this thing flies by. I put this on and it feels like it's over the instant it starts. And like, not to, like, you can pay attention, there's like a lot of interesting narrative moments in something like Colors One. Like, I feel like we went in depth to songs like Son of Nothing on that album, and that's here too. In fact, I think there's a really interesting meta element of Colors Two, where there's sort of an authorial / listener relationship going on here that I haven't fully unpacked, to the point where it frames the listener as someone who is like relaying the story in a continuation of the ideas that happen from Colors One, and also like it's like mildly antagonistic against them. Like at one point he like wants to to kill the writer, but like it's almost like the album is constantly baiting you in a way where I'm like, where I can only just summon my utmost respect. I'm just gonna keep like vomiting praise all over this damn thing, and somebody else needs to talk because of my incredibly nondescript thoughts here. But like, this is just one of the most fun experiences I've had with an album all year long, and it feels more rewarding every time I hear it. And the relentless creativity of this band just continues to just fundamentally astound me. I think the complaints that I've seen on this album, like, I can understand why a lot of people might not even like, if metalcore is not your bag, then sure, like, I can understand people being a little bit more mid on this. Maybe it's just too much for you. But like, the complaints that I've seen that kill me are that are just like, the band is like pretentious and they're taking themselves too seriously. And I'm just like, man, why do you listen to this band? I'm like, why do you listen to this band to begin with, first of all? And also, they have never taken themselves seriously. That is why Colors as an album exists in the first place. It is literally an exercise in frivolousness. And that's what this is. And I love it.
MLG Pro horn in this album.
Also,
they're pretentious. Fuck off.
Not to mention, I'm pretty sure it takes a degree of self-awareness to release an album called Colors 2 13 years after the first one.
Yeah.
Like, they know what they're in on the bit.
Yeah.
Colors was so good. Why isn't there a Colors 2?
Bitchy thought. Well, so this is an interesting note to pick up on, the notion of these two records in relationship to each other. And I can't pretend to say I've fully unpacked this, or even really barely unpacked this.
I haven't either.
I've certainly just tried to devote most of my energy to just absorbing the musicality of it, and then trying to figure out how I feel in relation to that. And Jake, you've touched on a kind of important element that threads the two Colors records together, which is this kind of zany, pure, nutso element to the ways in which these songs progress. And obviously that's not a thread that's unique to these two records for Between the Buried and Me, but it's certainly, from the records I've heard, which I've also heard, Alaska, Great Misdirect, and Coma Ecliptic, on these two records, it's much more kind of pronounced, and it's much more kind of the, I guess, main attraction of the general aesthetic. And yeah, you're right, Jake. I think you're spot on when you say this is a record that is less freewheeling off the wall crazy nutso than its predecessor, and it's more, I guess, refined and measured, and I guess built out into these fleshier, heavier arrangements. And the most extreme elements are not quite as extreme nor as extensive as those on the original record. And I feel like where I sit is that ultimately is weirdly why I still prefer the original. And I know that there's a very easy case here to be made for pulling up receipts on me and saying, well, actually, you said this, and this about the original Colors. But I've listened to that record a lot since we reviewed.
Yeah, that's the thing. I did front this review with the fact that, and most of the shit we said in the first Colors review is no longer accurate.
I mean, I gave Colors a 7, and it's a 9 now.
Yeah, I gave it a 7.5 and I've since bumped that to an 8. That record has really grown on me a lot. And even I know it's become a little bit of an in-joke between us, my distaste for the polka part on Answer the Sky. I will say that while that's not my favorite example of the band's zaniness, I fully appreciate it more than ever now. And what I tend to really get the most out of this band is when they're really leaning into these unexpected detours for their sound that they stitch beautifully into their arrangements. And they do that, I think, in a slightly more vivid and powerful way on the original record, which is not to say they don't do it powerfully here. But this is a record that, yes, Morgan's right that it's not that much longer than the original record, but it's a record that I think feels its length in a way that the previous record doesn't quite to the same extent. And
I think it's just because it feels more sprawling.
Yeah, exactly. And I, again, there's a certain extent to which I respect that as well, especially from a sequel record to really just kind of like, okay, let's turn this up to fucking 15. But it isn't like quite the turn it up to 15 that I would have hoped for from a record like this. Like, I really wanted to see this band going absolutely nuts. So I wanted to see something like Coma Ecliptic, but blown up to IMAX scale.
Not for nothing, Tyler, but you really need to listen to those Automata records, because on the second Automata record, there's just a song that becomes like a Disney villain song by way of Between the Buried and Me.
Oh yeah,
so
it's like
what you're looking for absolutely exists.
Yeah, and I think perhaps
it's
that
like
is it.
be prepared with fucking metalcore riffs.
Yeah, it literally is that.
Yeah,
it is.
And that could be it
10 songs
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But like, it's also weird, like the things that hold me back or give me slight pause with this album are not dissimilar to the things I love most about it. And
yeah,
which is a crazy weird state to be in. But I really love the twinkling aesthetics and the alt rock tone of the dynamic opening track Monochrome, which is an actual a total standout here. I think really brings the record vividly to life. And then it steamrolls right into Double Helix of Extinction, which is the band's metalcore at its most raging. Even I would describe it as purring to a certain extent. Like, it has this real kind of like, I don't know how to describe the timbre, but it's really, really great. The band's rhythm section is as locked in as ever, with some of the most propulsive and mind-boggling drumming they've laid to tape. The production, as has been said, is pristine. And it kind of has to be, like, again, if you're going to lean into this really shiny, almost like verging on parodic aesthetic, then you need to have a sound and a production style that really lifts that up and allows that to be fully realized. And it totally is here. Revolution in Limbo is an ambitious prog single with all the signifiers and aspects of a prog metal track cranked up to 11, fuck even 12. If you aren't into this band's hyper brand of prog metal, it will drive you crazy. And if you are into it, then it delivers some of the record's most fully realized musical ideas, hookiest refrains, most satisfying, tightly wound solos, and just general performances that I think lay the listener flat. It details a kind of uprising against an oppressive, tyrannical dictatorship. It has this Mars Volta, Francis the Mute-esque swinging breakdown with these Latin guitars in the second half, which I really like. And it's like that moment every time I listen to it, it's like, wow, could there be a record more made for this particular group of people, us here, to enjoy?
I like the part where he goes, we.
My only slight critique of the track is that I feel it loses a little bit of steam before its runtime is up, but it's still handily a highlight. There are lots of great instrumental details that are layered throughout this record, like the very proggy, plucked acoustic guitars on the first part of Prehistory, that smack of early Yes. The subtly layered choral vocals on the building climax of Bad Habits, which I love. The way that song really ascends and builds. And then like Fix the Error is a really cool track to zero in on, I think, because it is, as Jake's kind of alluded to, it's one of the most ridiculous moments on this record. And I kind of wish more of the album were like it in a weird way. It opens with this bass solo that is wah to shit. It just sounds.
I just, while we're here, Dan Briggs is one of the best bass players.
Oh God, he's so fucking fantastic on this.
Like every musician on in this band is god tier. I would say that they are the best working musicians around at
Drumming.
this point.
The
Yeah.
the bassist plays like he's in a Looney Tunes cartoon. It's just it's absolutely zany. Again, that word,
And
coming back to
like
it.
the only thing that's crazier than listening to it is watching him do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And human hands were not made to move like that.
Gene
I-
Hoglan
It's like
shit.
Yeah. And while I don't want to be the kind of person who just kind of point blank embraces wholeheartedly technicality for the sake of it, I'm also a person who is very enamored with the kind of technicality that this band displays. And it's always, again, very colorful and charismatic and full of, again, self-awareness and playfulness, which is what sells it. But yeah, that bass part that opens this song is just fucking goofy as hell. And then it has these ringing organ tones that give way to some, and I say this lovingly, very corny and intense metalcore. 5 years ago, I would have roundly kind of mocked this sort of music, but now I think with a bit of age and maturity, it's easier for me to appreciate that Between the Buried and Me wear their relentless absurdity on their sleeve. And honestly, the way that they always lean into the bit and take it to its most extreme only makes me respect them more. And again, I almost kind of wish that they had gone to the kind of wild extremes that they did on the first Colors, but I've already stated that. I'm not going to keep harping on it. There has to be a band doing shit like the cowbell breakdown on this song and the carnivalesque melodies and playful riffs layered throughout, even if the solos are, and again, I say this lovingly, totally corny and on the nose. Like there's solos on this album, and on this track in particular, they're like the most like stock prog rock solo, but it's done in a really like virtuosic way. But it's hard to describe that without sounding like I'm dissing it, and I'm not. But it's like,
I mean, that's the album, honestly. You can't really, like, to do anything else would be dishonest.
Yeah, and it's all part of the fun. And I can understand not being on board if this band isn't your bag, but moments like these make it. And I think Fix the Era is a total highlight for that reason. And as I've kind of said, if there is a place where the record falls short, it may be that it slightly comparatively lacks the raucous, freewheeling originality of its predecessor. I mean, to a certain extent, a lot of what makes Colors so flooring is its lack of clear precedent, even in the discography and even just in metalcore in general. It is this thing that comes out of the blue and completely bowls you over. And in Colors 2, maybe this is an unfair thing to say, but it automatically is a sort of hard thing to live up to because it's automatically not going to be the original statement that is. But that said, despite having an awful lot to live up to, a comparatively smaller bag of unique tricks and a longer runtime, it's still a really thrilling album experience. It just limits its ceiling for me, but that's a me thing totally. I still enjoy a great deal of this more and more each time I listen to it, honestly. And I'm pleased that the band got to execute this and have done it the way that they have. It's great that they exist, and I'm pleased to get to have a chance to talk about them again.
Yeah, Colors 2, the sequel to Colors. The physical concept of colors has been broadened and expanded on this album. I don't know what that means, but I'm going with it. Ironically, the album opens up with a song called Monochrome.
Hey!
Which very, very tongue-in-cheek, and I think one of the most direct references to the original Colors being kind of this tone setter in a very similar way that Foamborn, the backtrack, was.
I'll just keep waiting.
Yeah, I really love on this track the overly showy and glittery like keyboard parts that kind of contrast the ferocious main riff of this song. I think that's a hilarious little detail to open this up on. And yeah, something I do want to touch on is this idea of like the zaniness of this album, because in a way it speaks to me as being very different to how it was how a lot of these same ideas would have been executed on Colors, in that I find a lot of the zaniness is a lot more reminiscent of, like a Devin Townsend or a Mike Patton even.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's this really interesting, kind of hard to describe distinction between the two records, but in a way it feels fundamentally different, but going for a lot of the same ideas. And I think that's a really interesting direction to take this record in, so that it isn't just like we're doing colors again, we're doing colors, but how we would do it in present decade. And I like that quite a bit. I think it shows the band's ambition, willingness to evolve and expand their sound without feeling dependent upon the nostalgia, which they're obviously kind of poking fun at a little here. The thing I think I preferred most about this album to the original was kind of the narrative and central lyrical themes, where I feel it was really well defined on Colors too, kind of what it was going for, this a kind of overthrowing of an empire, this kind of human destruction of ourselves, these broader topics, which I'm sure deeper reading into the album will deliver a more clear vision of what that is, what that means, and how that fits in, how that pieces together. But I think that's, in my opinion, this record's most interesting and exciting improvement over the original Colors, which lyrically comes off as a little vague, and it's more a record you're there for the spectacle of the instrumentals, which I obviously love. I love the original Colors record, so that's not a slight. That's just something this does differently, but but in an interesting way. Tommy Rogers, I think, as a singer, who I don't believe we've mentioned him too much. I think he's wonderful. His soaring, clean vocals and guttural growls do a great job at balancing the progressive metal and metalcore influences of this band, something I think is a really necessary bridge, that he's able to sing both of these kind of styles of metal singing over one another, as well as just kind of doing a straightforward progressive metal sound and a straightforward metalcore sound. And when he's fusing those two influences and ideas, balancing one with his voice and the band is doing another with their instruments, I think it creates for some really interesting, exciting little sparks on the record.
When he just turns in Lane Staley on the air.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't even think about
Hell
Lane
yeah.
Staley, but that's, yeah.
You see the rainbow.
Dude, I
Oh my
lost
gosh.
my shit. I was just walking through work when I listened to that for the first time, and then I was just like, I just turned a corner, and then just like there's this, it's like harmonized too, so it sounds like a group of them. It's like, if you see the rainbow, and I was like,
Fucking jump scare.
What the
It's
fuck?
so
Yeah.
That's certainly what it felt like to listen to on this end right now.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I love that aspect about this album. That's a lot of my favorite stuff about the album. Although I do share some criticisms with Tyler, mainly where I think this feels its runtime a little in the way the first Colors album didn't for me. The 80 minutes, I think, can run a little drab, and tracks like Prehistory and a lot of the stock sound effect stuff I really didn't care for at all.
Glad I'm not the only one then.
Yeah, like Double Helix of Destiny or whatever fucking
Extinction.
bullshit it's called. Didn't work. Fucking MLG air horns. Why? I respect it, but I don't
Because
like it.
it's fun, Jan.
No, I respect it. It ain't me, but interesting. I have to, if nothing else, applaud them for having the fucking gusto to do that. I think that's respectable on a creative level, if nothing else.
Many
Well,
questions.
I like the sound more than Colors. I'll say that. It is a definite improvement on my reaction to music by this band that I think are talented, that I don't particularly care for.
Damning with faint praise.
I don't even mean to damn them. I think I mean to say this, like, their sound, I've tried many times now. It's not for me. I'll probably try again. And this is probably my best experience with them so far is this record.
For obvious reasons, I feel this was my most anticipated album of the year, and I don't think there is anything on the horizon that will surpass that level of excitement, because it's as much as they toy with it in the album proper, it is a deliberate, almost provocation to announce that the next album the band is, it's like Metallica coming back with Master of Puppets 2.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Oh, what? You don't, okay.
This means something.
This is different now, and you know that it's different now, so live up to that, basically. And from the second I heard from the second I heard Fix the Error and saw that it had like 3 different drummers on that solo section, one of which is Mike Portnoy, previously of Dream Theater, I was like, okay, they're gonna do it. I don't have anything to worry about here. And Revolution and Limbo just laid that in concrete as the next single release. Like, okay, then there's not even. And do you want to know what is that they fucking did it? I'm nowhere near done with this. It feels like the first time I saw 2049 in theaters, and I'm just hang on, they gave you $200 million and just let you do this?
Can he say this? Literally.
I need a minute to catch up. And I will say I empathize and agree with Tyler's perspective of it leaving him exhausted by the end of it, because I do feel exhausted by the end of this. But it's also fucking the hobbits coming back to the Shire, and you're just like, we can never go back.
Yeah, I will say like
turn on the album again.
It's a fulfilled exhaustion. Like when specifically that closing track, which is 15 minutes long, it feels like an album's worth of ideas in that song alone. Like when I listen to it, when I listen to that song, it feels double its runtime in a very good way. Like it actually is not dissimilar to the way that Dream Theater would end albums with like these fucking album long
by design
epics. Oh, totally. But like that's I mean that's the pure joy of it. I think it's unarguably, in my opinion, the most fully realized and exciting piece of music on this record. I don't even get to talk about it, but
I would refer to it as, even more so than something like White Walls or Swim to the Moon, as this band's Cassandra Gemini in that sense.
Oh yeah.
Jesus, give me a 30-minute Between the Buried and Me song. I know you can do it. I'm not done with this. I'm not 100% sure where everything falls on rankings, or like even I don't have 100% clarity on how I feel about this album. All I know is that I've listened to it in double digits at this point, and I will listen to it like it's so rich. I completely empathize with the idea that it is an embarrassment of riches. And while it's exhausting and taxing to get a good grasp on, it's like any great work of literary fiction that also happens to be 1,100 pages long and this thick, because by the time you're done with it, you're like, I've seen the face of it, and I don't even know what it is, but I have seen it.
I'll just keep waiting.
Okay, favorite tracks and ratings. My 3 favorites are Human as Hell, another one with love in parentheses, Revolution and Limbo, and Monochrome.
Makes sense.
Least favorite track is probably Turbulent, and I'm giving this record a 7.
Oh, cool. My favorite tracks are Never Seen / Future Shock, The Future is Behind Us, and Human as Hell, open bracket, another one with love, close
fucking
bracket.
Sick is The Future is Behind Us, though.
Oh god, so
like that,
fucking good.
That is something that sounds completely unlike anything they've done before.
Which, like, how? They've made like 10 albums and shit. How do they keep doing new things?
This record's getting a 7.5 for me.
My favorite tracks. I think Never Seen / Future Shock is just one of this band's shining moments.
Yes.
Across their entire discography. Yeah. And, so is Human as Hell, parenthetical, Another One with Love. But I personally prefer Never Seen, but that is a close second, so fucking whatever. Yet Another 10, because I am a whore and stuff.
I would have you no other way.
All right. My favorite songs on the album are Never Seen, Future Shock, Human as Hell, and Fix the Error. Least favorite is Prehistory. Gets a 7 out of 10 from me.
This album gets a nice rollicking 9 out of 10.
This is 8.1 on average.
What can we expect next week in terms of content? And later
That's
on,
an 8.1 on average, which we have also given to Searching for Clarity by Against Me, The Bends, and Carole King's Tapestry.
All right, so let us know in the comments below what you think of either of the albums that we've discussed today. Two very different records that we've expressed some varying opinions on. So we'd love to hear from you. If you're a BT Bam fan, let us know where you think that Colors 2, how it compares to the original, where you think it sits in their discography. Similarly with Chvrches, do you agree with us that on their broad take that screen violence is a return to form for them? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like the video and remember to subscribe if you are not already subscribed as well. We're heading towards that 1K subs mark, which we're feverishly anticipating. And yeah, make sure you stick around as well for later in the week when we release our record club on System of a Down's Toxicity, which is turning or has just turned 20. And we'll also be continuing our 1991 retrospective, talking about Talk Talk's Laughing Stock on Thursday. So stick around for that as well. August, why don't you lead us out?
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Crayola, the art of childhood.